As complimentary as I have been about Henry Ford and his $5 a day wage, it's important not to fall prey to the great man theory that says only a benevolent, enlightened rich man can make an impact on the world. The $5 day was an important milestone, but as I would like to explore in greater detail, unions played a much larger role in the advances made by the American working class in the 20th century. Henry Ford is an extremely flawed hero. Like in the Blues Brothers movie, one imagines that a portrait of Adolf Hitler sits on the wall of every modern-day neo-Nazi. But do you know whose life-size portrait adorned Hitler's wall in Munich? None other than Henry Ford's. The Fuhrer was a longtime fan of Ford and quoted the industrialist's book, The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem, extensively in Mein Kampf. Can you imagine one of Ford's modern-day analogs, like, say, Jeff Bezos, writing a book called The International Jew? Oh my goodness. In 1933, the Detroit News quoted Hitler saying, "I regard Henry Ford as my inspiration." Before hostilities broke out between the U.S. and Germany, Hitler sent a special delegation up to Ford's office in Dearborn, Michigan, to present him with a 75th birthday present, the Grand Cross of the German Eagle. The medal, a gold Maltese cross bedecked with 4 eagles clutching swastikas, was the highest honor Nazi Germany could bestow on a foreigner. The relationship went far beyond mere admiration, however. Henry Ford provided early seed money for the Nazi Party as far back as 1922. There's also substantial evidence that Ford Motors was profiting off both the Allied and Axis sides of the war effort. As the German offensive kicked into high gear in 1939, 70% of the German auto market was dominated by American companies Ford and General Motors, GM through subsidiary Opel, which GM owned outright. These factories quickly retooled to crank out vehicles and aircraft for the Reich. Opel even built a plant near Berlin to manufacture the Blitz truck in 1935, later used in blitzkrieg attacks on Poland and the Soviet Union and France. In 1940, Henry Ford personally vetoed a plan to use Ford plants to make Rolls-Royce engines for Royal Air Force fighters. At the same time, the Germans were abducting Russian peasants to use as forced labor at the Ford plant in Cologne. Survivor Elsa Ivanova described what that was like after being torn from her family at 16, saying, "The conditions were terrible. They put us in barracks on 3-tier bunks." She explained to the Washington Post, "It was very cold. They did not pay us at all and scarcely fed us. The only reason that we survived was that we were young and fit." Ford Motors initially claimed that it made no money from the Cologne plant during the war, but documentation proves that they got at least $60,000 in dividends from their German subsidiary between 1940 and 1943. After the United States entered the war in 1941, it became illegal for U.S. auto companies to have any contact with subsidiaries inside German-occupied territory. That didn't stop Henry Ford's son Edsel, company president at the time. After France fell to the Third Reich, Maurice Dollfus of French Ford told Edsel Ford that they could continue to produce 20 V8 trucks a day for the Wehrmacht. He also informed him that Germany was paying its debts. Net profits for 1941 would top 58 million francs. Edsel was pleased, cabling back, "Delighted to hear you are making progress." It's likely that U.S. Air Force bombing runs deliberately avoided European plants owned by Wall Street interests. After British bombing command struck a Ford plant in Poissy, the Vichy government compensated Ford with 38 million francs. The Justice Department concluded that there was a basis for a case against Edsel Ford for trading with the enemy. It's possible that he would have faced prosecution if he hadn't died in 1943. Possible, however, very unlikely. Author Anthony Sutton didn't mince words in his book Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, saying, "If the Nazi industrialists brought to Nuremberg were guilty of crimes against mankind, then so must be their fellow collaborators in the Ford family, Henry and Edsel Ford." Hey, I hope you consider subscribing to my Substack, letsmakethempay.substack.com. Let's make them pay.